Olá, bom dia telespectadores, bem-vindo novamente a mais programa da KMANEK. A minha salok tetebes nama bila seru malu filfal hoita botsira e hadet programa da KMANEK. E ha lorong dahulu basemana dan eniang ami fiar katak ita botsir hoto condição saúde nebe makadiak.
Hamutuk falei o Carsolita Oliveira.
No hau Jacinta Lemos durante minuto balo nelara. A se oferece informação o embeta botsira, até tudo dia que lutang ita botsira o ensaio atividades balorong idohin hodiak.
Também a mim você espera que até maluco ouvintes, no telespectadores, com condição saudável, tu assiste programa da KMANEK, Torre Mata. E ouvintes no telespectadores, programa da KMANEK by edição Idohin, ita se colia conaba envolvimento na experiência Sr. Pet Wolsnian durante tinang naruk nelarang e a Timor-Leste, nebema kita belian kata ko di contribuimos buat lubukida by Timor-Leste. E Sr. Pet Wols no dar cidadão estrangeiro ida nebe halibur história Timor-Nian, hahusi tempo ocupação Indonésia, to o lorong. E dedicamos ninhaan e serviço de direitos humanos, além de daremos serviço importante e nebe makanya halo maka hakerek most relatório e chega. Também ouvintes no telespectadores, lá o cidadão direito, mas bem, Sr. Pet Wols mos hakerek livro balon, no mos revista balon, nebe maka o título interessante tebes, kona ba Timor-Leste. Também na tua hatene klean, kona ba ijane, ita se badada liha mutu ko Sr. Pet Wols, nebe mak marca uma presença e estudo dois gemini. Mas bem, durante itaninia diálogo, né, se iha tradução e ao mesmo tempo interpretação ba iha itane diálogo, também Sr. Pet Wols, no dar cidadão Austrália ida, nebe maka kuliah lian inglesa. Naman ito ba si hamutuk Sr. Pet, nebe mak marca uma presença e estudo dois gemini. Bom dia, Sr. Pet.
Bom dia, Jacinta.
Ito dia kala.
And Lita.
Okay. Ito dia kala, Senhor.
How are you?
I'm good. I had meetings all last week, so a little bit tired, but very happy to be in East Timor and here at GMN. So thank you.
Thank you.
How dia? Semana liba how serviço na puno encontro coleton. Mas bem how contente los atuia Timor-Leste e agora rau que é GMN.
Dia kami mos espera katak senhor ho condição saudável, atu nune bele partilha liliu baitane experiência e no mosan esta ngoi hano colega, halo tradução ona kona baitane assunto balorong ohiniam baitane maluco vintes no telespectadores.
So I hope that you are healthy enough to share with us your stories, share with us your experience in this program.
Yeah.
Mas bem antes né, maluco ouvintes no telespectadores, cara kita vou tirar iha dúvida, apreciação, comentário ruma, liga o assunto ida né, te vou tirar bele manda, te vou tirar mensagem Miami, lihusti número WhatsApp no bem makamus ona iha ekran televisão. Hanesang hitu-hitu ida 5 tolu-tolu walu-walu. Repete tanda ida hitu-hitu ida 5 tolu-tolu walu-walu. Kita halua hakeri narang kompleto e helafating atua.
Sr. Pet, hanesang ohing ami halona introdução simples quando vai taniaan e hane ami karak mos for oportunidade ba ita, o insato bele haktuir quando vai tani identidade pessoal no insai tani família.
To start, would you please introduce yourself and also a little bit about your family and your background?
Thank you. Well, I'm 82 years old on the 3rd of December this year, about the same age as President Biden. So I've had a long life, and I won't start talking about everything, but I was born in southern Australia on a dairy farm. My dad and mum were dairy farmers, very simple life. When I was young, no electricity, no running water, outside toilet, baptised in the local church, altar boy in the local church, went to primary school at the local state school, and then to a Catholic college, from where I was recruited into the seminary, and in 1966 I was ordained a priest. So I'm no longer a priest. I've been married for over 40 years and I have 7 grandchildren. But Timorese often ask me, do you still feel you are a priest? And I say, well, of course, I'm not a priest and I don't have a license to say Mass or preach. But in some ways, yes, because I still do battle with evil. I still try to promote the values that Pope Francis promotes through his document with the Imam of Al-Azhar in Egypt, Common Humanity or Human Fraternity. And I've been involved here in East Timor with reconciliation for many years. During all that time, reconciliation for me meant bringing together and making peace between perpetrators, pelaku, and victimas, korban. Now, thanks to Indigenous friends in Australia, I see reconciliation as a much broader concept, more holistic, more global, and it is bigger than just peace between somebody who hurts and somebody who has been hurt. It's about reconciliation with yourself, with other people, very much with nature at this time of dramatic climate change, reconciliation with nature because we have hurt nature and Mother Nature is crying out, and lastly reconciliation with God. So I have a much broader concept now.
How idade 82 anos agora, how Morris hanesang ho, how nitinang Morris hanesang ho Presidente Amerika, Presidente Biden. How Morris iha Australia do Sul, parte sul australiana, husi família simples dos na ida, how batizado iha igreja local, iha a minha igreja iha arena ba, e vamos ba escola iha escola público, escola pública iha a minha área, e depois how tama seminário no iha 1966 ao retan ordenação sai padre ida, mas beu in lorong how laos padre ona, how forma uma família batinang hat nulu, ia agora rau que iha be oang naing hitu. Mga luk Timor Oang Barak sempre husau itabot se sente kalahan sang padre ida mesmo que itabot laos padre ona. I da hau hatan hau label halo misa ona, hau label halo buat sira nebe padre ida halo. Mai be hau hanesang mo so emaseluk se luta na fating hasoro diabo lorong. I promove i comunga valor sira nebe, por exemplo, agora Papa Francisco, Santo Papa Francisco, hakere kela, kulia hela, ia documento ida nebe nia asina ho Imam Al-Azhar tinang hirak liuba, documento ida naran fraternidade humana, e how nia serviço ia área reconciliação, atu reconcilia autor sira ho vítima sira, e tamba ho tulung husi povo indígena sira e Austrália how agora percebe lutan, compreende lutan, katak reconciliação ne la os det limita ba vítima e autor, mas be reconciliação ne buat ida que luan lutan entre ita ho emaseluk, entre ita ho itania inimigo mos, e sobretudo e entre ita ho maromak.
E ao mesmo tempo estamos bele haktu eroituang konaba mais ou menos iha satina makita presença iha Timor ou itama iha Timor iha satina e mai ho missão ida wensa.
Can you tell us about your involvement with Timor? What year did you first come to Timor? And how did you get involved in the whole story of Timor?
Actually, I think the best answer is to say I came to East Timor through Indonesia. In fact, Hugo Fernandez, the director of Centro Nacional Chega, said the other day that I have been in East Timor longer than the Indonesian military.
How lolos how my Timor ne liu si Indonesia. Ia lorong hirak liu ba diretor executivo Sensei Senhor Hugo Fernandes até kita bot ia Timor ne liu fali Indonesia sira ia Timor.
So I was teaching Latin in a big school in Australia, and the Second Vatican Council happened, and the Vatican Council decided that the liturgy, Mass, etc. should be in the vernacular in Australia, in English, no longer Latin. So I said I had done some Eastern studies at the Australian National University in Canberra, and I said to the principal of the school, why don't we replace Latin with Indonesian? Now, so I was sent off to the university. In Australia, schools finish in December and then start again sort of late January. So there was about 6 weeks period where I could do a cursus intensive, cursus kilat, at Monash University and learn enough Indonesian to come back at the beginning of the new semester and teach Indonesian. And because I was learning Indonesian and interested in Indonesia, I followed what was happening in Indonesia and therefore followed what happened here in 1974 and 75.
Uluk hawanoring Latina, lingua Latina, e escola botida. E Concílio Vaticano II foi decisão ida katak missa sira, liturgia sira, hagusi concílio né, la halo ona ia Latina, mas be ia Austrália bele halo missa ho inglês. Então how tambah how sekolah iha na Universidade Nasional Australia e Canberra how hatete ba aminia diretor husu atu tambah tenke troca Latina então how suzere katak atu muda troca Latina ho liang Indonesia então tambah ia currículo Australia ne escola ne remate dezembro e hu fale tinang tuirmai então how aproveita tempo irane atu bele foti curso liang Indonesia curso liang Indonesia iha Brisbane University
Monash University
Universidade de Monash desculpa huri aprende língua Indonesia husi dane macau depois bele acompanha saída maca acontece iha Indonesia saída det maca acontece ba e obviamente tambah reconhece a Indonesia e consegue aprender quando vai sair maca acontece Timor liu e tinang 1974 e 75.
So this was 1968, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first in that part of Australia to introduce Bahasa Indonesia. And so I'm very, very proud of that.
Yes.
And as a result, I mean, it introduced me to East Timor, but it also was the beginning of a long love relationship with Indonesia.
Yes.
I've been to Indonesia many times. I'm not anti-Indonesian, I'm very pro-Indonesian, but I wasn't very happy with Suharto, of course, or the Indonesian military. So to give you some examples, I hosted people like Buyung Nasution to Australia. I knew Aswab Mahasin. I was actually at the office of SCEPI, an Indonesian NGO in Jakarta, in 1991 when news came through of the Dili massacre, Santa Cruz massacre. I was in the office at a meeting, and the director of SCEPI came and said, "There's a phone call, something terrible has happened in Dili, would you take it?" And it was Fernando Lasama in Bali who'd received information from Dili about the massacre. He told me, I was one of the first outside East Timor to know about Santa Cruz massacre. I immediately went to El Bihar, to Mulya Lubis, talked to the International Red Cross, Palang Merah Internacional, who had their office in Jakarta, and started sort of, if you like, organising an Indonesian response to this terrible moment. So I'll just finish by saying that I also began a magazine about Indonesia called Inside Indonesia. It actually should have been called Outside Indonesia because it was published in Melbourne. But it was to educate Australians about the other side of Indonesia, not just Suharto, but the NGO community, the activist community, the human rights community, the women's community, Indigenous, etc. So I started that, and it will be 40 years old this November. It's still published in Australia online. I'm very proud of that. Last thing to say is my 3 daughters also learned Indonesian, 2 of them in Jogja, and one of them is an Indonesian teacher, and the other one translates Indonesian most days in Australia.
Acontecimento irane acontece em 1968. Acontecimento irane hane sang início si haune história domin o naruk o Indonesia. How atu de handet kata kau pro Indonesia. Mai be hau lagosta Suharto honia regime militar. Tambanemak iranemak hau la aceita. Hanesang exemplo balum iha Australia ne fo fating hela fating ba maluk Indonesia sira balu hanesang senhor Buyung Nasution e nia mo serviço há serviço ia LBH SCEPI ia Jakarta e quando massacre Santa Cruz acontece há serviço ela ia momento na ba há ia ela há serviço fati e diretor SCEPI mai atete hau kata que ia telefone ida ba ia telefone mai ida ba hau mai ida karakuli hau e quando hau sim o telefone ne mai husi matebiang senhor Fernando Lasama que informa hau quando ba sai de acontece a Dili e husi au nitulo então sai de makawalo momento na ba mak hak basic ba LBH ho liu senhor Mulya Lubis atu kuliah kona bedane atu kuliah kona ba masakre nebe acontece ia Indonesia ma ulu kaumos hahu revista ida que i basic kona atu completa tinangat nulu revista ne tamba imprimi mesmo que bolo inside Indonesia los ne bolo den outside Indonesia mai be tamba imprimi Melbourne los imprimi Indonesia revista ne ami hasai atu konta sai Indonesia ne bela ostet ni update sai de mak la ostet kono Suharto o nia militar o buat sirane hotu mai be atu hare kona ba parte selu kaladu selu kusi sorin selu kusi Indonesia ativista sirania luta serviço dia nebe sirahalo sai de mak sociedade civil sirahalo yana ba atu hatetenet mos ia hauni wang sira naing tolu sira mos aprende kono Indonesia naing roa foto la kursi Jakarta ida hanorin lingua Indonesia ida selok mos halo tradução Indonesia para inglês ida nemak sira halo agora.
Senhor
Can
Peter.
I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
So I could come and go from Indonesia even during the Suharto period, and I became part of the clandestine, East Timorese clandestine underground. So I used to meet with Renetil people. They would give me documents, sometimes in the back of a taxi in Jakarta. Sometimes we went way out to Ancol and sat in the dark being eaten by mosquitoes while they told me what was happening, and then my job was to take it out of Indonesia and then to disseminate it to people like Jose Ramos Horta in New York and the activist movement around the place. But in 1992, the Indonesian government caught me because João Câmara testified in his trial regarding the Santa Cruz massacre that he worked with a guy called Pat Walsh. He thought it would help him get off, that would help him avoid a sentence, but actually it worked the other way. He got sent to jail. And when I came back to Jakarta after that, I came into, the airport, lined up. A colleague went ahead with one of my cases. For some strange reason, it had one shoe in it, and the case with me had the other shoe. And I was taken out of the queue and interrogated in the office and told I was being deported. But I had to stay in the airport all night. And I slept in the broom cupboard in the airport in Jakarta. And I was deported for 3 or 4 years. So I wasn't allowed, I was black banned, was not allowed into Indonesia for 3 or 4 years. So every time I come to Dili airport and they ask on the form, have you ever been deported? I say no, but I just feel a very big pang of conscience that I'm telling a lie.
Tambahau estrangeiro e hau bela mesmo que há tempo regime Suharto hau bela tama sa Indonesia, hau sai parte movimento clandestino ba luta Timor-Leste. Dalla barak hau nia serviço barak liuma hodi sai carta siranebe itania movimento luta ba ukun rasikan hakerek. E então hau nia serviço ma kode carta sirane sai dalla barak hau simu carta sirane quando hau ia taxilaran e mai forrela carta sirane ba hau ia taxilaran e dalla rumah me tem que ba subaria na kukunlaran ia Ancol atau encontro susukan amito diria carta sira hodi sai hau manda quando manda tutamba ema sirane sang atual presidente senhor Ramos Horta e ema siraselu que halo movimento luta ba ukun rasikan idane la odia te to 1992 Indonesia cair con hau tamba e momento na ba sira halo julgamento ba Timor ida senhor João Câmara que ia julgamento nia hatete sai nia fiar kata quando nia hatete sai idane se ajuda salva nia nia hatete sai kata nia halo serviço ho estrangeiro ida homalai ida narang Pat Walsh nia hatete idane ho fiar kata o tamba nia estrangeiro nia se então Indonesia se bele nia se bele salva nia sai dema que acontece contrário la ajuda nia tama cadeia e quando hau fila hau mai fali Indonesia hau de pastarwa sapato balu ia paste de seluk sapato balu ia paste de seluk e quando ami forma hela tu foti bagagem sirane hau ema para teu hadara sai teu si usilinya e hatete hau kata sira de Indonesia deportau e kalang na tem que toba de tia sala ida ia armário aisar ne tamba la ia fating bahau te toba ia kalang ne e hau sira deportau to tinang hat hau lebele tama Indonesia e tamba nema qualquer tempo quando hamai Timor e formulário ia imigração nen huso e tabot ema ulu ketan deportação ruma hau sempre tete lai Maybe how ne fuang how deng bahau bosok hela tang ulu ke reporta how.
Senhor Pet, nessa ONG internacional, além de te envolver em movimento clandestino, estamos a cara catene com a itani atividade selep. Nessa ita botmos, nessa voluntário consultor ida e momento neba. Te cara corona atividade saída dit ma kita halo e momento ita sai nessa voluntário consultor.
Apart from your involvement in the clandestine movement, you also did other things such as being a volunteer consultant. So can you share us a little bit about that part of work that you did?
Well, actually, it pardon me. My first big involvement with East Timor was, yes, voluntary, sukarela, and it was to help reunite separated Timorese families, because after the civil war here, many Timorese came to Australia, but it was, the wife and one child, or, sometimes the husband and the wife left behind. So after Indonesia invaded, the Australian government said they can be reunited. It was more complicated than that, but that's roughly it. So with a friend, we set up an organisation called RAFT, Reunite in Australia Families of Timor, RAFT. And we raised about $100,000 to pay for airfares, for travel, but also, sorry to say this, also whisper, to pay bribes to Indonesian officials to get these people out of Dili to Jakarta and then from Jakarta to Australia. So we helped. It was humanitarian in inspiration to bring families together again, but it was also to build up the Timorese community in Australia, and they became very effective lobby group within Australia, and many of them now serve in senior positions here in the government or as ambassadors, etc., etc. So, indirectly that was a really nice thing to do. The next big involvement I had was also voluntary. It was to learn to detect. It was sort of a piece of detective work, because information from Timor was very piecemeal, very incomplete, and sometimes you didn't know apakah ini benar atau salah. Was it fake news or not? The big piece of work I did was on the famine in East Timor, Hamlaha, the famine in East Timor in 1977, 78, 79. And following that, I went with Father Francisco Fernandez, who was in Australia, to testify to the US Congress about the famine. And then I did a visit all around the world, including to the Vatican and back to Jakarta, talking about the famine and saying this is terrible what is happening in East Timor. So they were both voluntary, but then because of my work on the famine, I was then employed by the Australian Council for Overseas Aid, a peak body for all the Australian overseas aid agencies, to work with them on East Timor. And then that evolved into working for international human rights.
How ni involvimento bot ho Timor ida mak ine voluntário mak atu halibur fali katau hamutuk fali família sira Timor Oang que ia Austrália tamba ia momento quando Timor Oang sira refugia ba Austrália. Sira quase balu inang dit makbaho oang ida balu amang dit makba I kaunya kaben hela te Timor família barak mak fahemalu então serviço nebe ami halo ne mak atu halibur filafali família sira ia momento neba depois de ser maka acontece governo Austrália até kata família sirane pele reunido fali. Então ami halo anggaresan fundo so di hetang dolar yung atu sida atu ajuda sosa bilhete ba família sirane be sira husikele ene atu ba mai be parte idane desculpa o tem que até sai parte balu husi osang sirane maka atu hal ba atu bele suborno pa oficial Indonesia sira atu bele permiti família sirane be hela te diline atu bele sira bele ba Jakarta e depois ami sai ba Austrália serviço idanema kami halo atu bele tulung família sira tamba ia momento na ba Austrália hakarak habot komunidade Timor e Austrália hori none bele halo lobby advocacia ba causa Timornia agora serviço ida seluk ne mak e dalita ne voluntário mak ia tamba ia momento na ba informação mai usi Timor ne dala barak ita lahatene los informação ne los kalai veracidade informação ne difícil tebes atu ita justifica informação ne be mai kala los então serviço seluk ne be ami halo mak atu hare kona ba hamlaha ia hamlaha ne serviço ne ia era sira me 77, 78 e 79 serviço idanema atu halo e ne inclui bahamutoko amo Padre Francisco da Silva City Timor Padre Timorong ide Austrália que ami tem que ba hato hasta kuliah ia Kongresu Amerika kona ba hamlah ia Timor então na foi idane ami ne serviço maklau hale mundo inclui ba Vaticano e nação terceiro ka tu até kata ia Timor Leste ia momento no ba acontece hamlah habot e idane dalai datan serviço voluntário ida que halo mas be tamba serviço idanemos depois governo Austrália desculpa fila fale bakoto kiton serviço atu halibur família sirane ia sira ia serviço ia buat ira nebe sira bolo dengan raft ne abreviação ida halibur fali família sira ne husi Timor atu halibur fali sira Australia agora fila fali ba ida oing ho Australia tamba serviço nebe halo e depois governo Austrália usual tu serviço ba agência governo nebe hare ba ajuda sira ka assistência internacional sira tu hola parte se serviço ia serviço idane
famine it still upsets me because it did happen a long time ago in the 1970s before you people were born.
Yeah.
But for poor people not to be able to feed themselves or their children or their grandparents is a shocking thing, but even more shocking is when the famine is organised, when food is taken away or the opportunity to grow or obtain food is taken away from you deliberately, and that is a terrible crime. So it's not so well known, and it needs to be better known that was done. And it also upsets me because my great-grandparents were refugees from the famine in Ireland in the middle of the 19th century. So it's sort of in my DNA, in a sense, to feel bad about this, particularly bad about this.
How kono hamlahane how la contente to agora ko buat ida naran hamlahane tamba iha 70 sirane tempo ida be ita bot sira moris mai be hamlaha ia tempo na bane liu ba família kwit like sira família kiak sira ke la bele ia han la bele fohang sira ne oang sira la bele labele fohang sira ne família sira. Ne buat chocado ida. Tu hare família sira liu quit like sira la consegue iahan atu bele sustenta sira nia an. Ne buat chocado buat ida. Mas chocado liutan ida ne mak bangira hamlahane buat organizado ida. Emaho intencionalmente hapara possibilidade ou hapara fornecimento hahan, ka disponibilidade hahan ou hapara possibilidade ba família sira tu bele hetan hahan. Ida ne crime ida que cruel, crime ida que tebes tamba ne haul dum contente to agora tamba historicamente haunia vis-a-vis sira ne refugia mai Australia tamba hamlahan. Sira refugia mai Australia husi Irlanda tamba hamlahan tamba no nemak ida ne hane sang buat tidak kuda tioni haunia DNA kata haula gosta ka haula contente ka buat tidak hamlahan.
And in this book I have a chapter called Labarik Feto Forme. There was a photo taken of this particular girl in 1978, I think. And I went to Laga 2 years ago. It occurred to me, maybe she survived. She looked terrible in the photo. The photo was taken about 1978, and I used to think surely she is dead. But a couple of years ago I went to Laga, where the photo was taken in 1978, looking for her, and I discovered to my great joy that she is still alive and she lives, I think, in Bagia now. So, Labarik Feto Forme in this book.
Ia livro ida ne, ia hauni livro ida ke hawa kerek ne, ia capítulo ida ke hakerek, também ia 1978, ia foto ida ne bahasa ia Laga, ia momento ne ba. La foto ne depois am bolu Labarik Feto ne hamlaha. Kenya condição ne atlos, ia momento ne ba, i tinang rua liu ba hawa karakatene, se karik Labarik Feto ne sobrevive. E semana tinang rua liu ba, quando hau balaga, hau contente los, tambarona, katak, Labarik Feto ne, mana ne, agora se ia ela, se mori se ela nia sobrevive, mas be, condição ia 78 ne tebes, tamba ne mak ia foto ne be foto ia momento ne ba ne, bolu Labarik Feto ne be hamla.
Senhor Pet, nessa ohing ita rona ona kona bahita ni envolvimento e a história Timor-Leste importante sira ne bemaka ita mos koko atu preserva na fatin ho maneira hakerek que é parte da revista, além de temos iha livro bema ho temática oi ita bela fahemos kona ba iha temática ne bemaka ita hili além de temática ne bema kohinta kolia kona ba feto ne bema hamlaha babe iha tangkalai selok ne bemaka ita karak fahia momento idane.
In your involvement with Timor-Leste, among all the great work you have done for Timor-Leste, you have also archived, you have also preserved all this story, the history in a written form. They came into the form of books. Can you share with us, apart from the story that you've just shared about the little girl in Lagam, anything else that you have written, anything that you can share with us?
Well, this book is, I didn't write it in Tetum. My daughter translated it from my English to Tetum. And everybody says the Tetum is fantastic. It's many of the schools are using it here because they are short accounts. Like I have a story about Busak Shanana's cat. I have one about the Kuda Timor.
Yeah.
The Timorese horse is well known all over the world, but very few people connect it to East Timor, to Timor-Leste. There's even an image of that horse on the $10 note in Australia, but no one connects it with this country. I have a story about the old lady who sells honey around Dili. I've seen her 2 or 3 times on this visit. About Jamie Patria, who is mentally disturbed by the war, but actually in his own strange way makes some really very wise comments, and I include that in there. I also, the reference in the title, the day, hope and history rhymed in East Timor, is about my coming here in 1999 for the referendum. So I was here as part of the Australian government delegation with another community representative to witness the fantastic historic moment of Timor voting freely to decide their future, their act of self-determination. So the first chapter, the title is about that, and the first chapter is about that marvellous experience. And in this book here, I have some poems about East Timor. It's not all about East Timor, but I have some poems about East Timor, and one of them is called The Chosen One, and it's about the 6-inch nail, the paku panjang, that was used to push a hole in yes or no in the referendum in 1999. And I thought it was really sort of fascinating that a nail was used to nail East Timor's future. And there's another one in here called Wailili 1999, where a friend of mine who was the electoral officer in Wailili in August 1999 was telling the local community, he actually spoke Tetum, he was Kieran Dwyer from Sydney, he spoke Tetum, and he was explaining how the vote was going to work, and suddenly an old man stood up and said in a very quiet voice, "When it comes time to vote, will all those who have been killed since 1975 also be able to vote?" Fantastic question, eh? And Kieran said, everybody went quiet to hear what he would answer, and he said, "Of course the dead cannot vote, but you, the living, are really voting 3 times, for yourselves, for the dead, and once for the generation of children still not born." So I thought that was beautiful, and I've written a poem about it. Referendum.
Ya, ia livro primeiro, how hakerek buat balung. Por exemplo, ida konaba membuat chana niabusa. How kerek ia partida henaba. Ida segundo konaba kuda Timor. Kuda ida que conhecido ia mundo tomak. Mas be é mabarak la consegue hare ligação kuda ne ho Timor. Kuda ida ne mak agora rauk ia hela ia moeda ia osang Australia ia dolar sanulu niang ne ia imagem kuda ida ema barak la hatene katak imagem kuda ne kuda Timor ema la hatene conexão kuda ne hot Timor Leste. Então hawa kerekela ida ia kona ba ida ne ia livro ne ema ida selo buat ida selo que hawa kerek ia livro ne mak senhora Ferikida que lá o haleu ia dilarang durante a universidade da Leira, né, a sorone dal Rua Cadal Tolo, que fan bani bem. Senhor Jaime Patria que tamba nia Hanoi barak demais, quando a saída maca acontece Timor nia anesang psicologicamente Hanoi lalos, mas vê ho consegue halo ho estranho de maneira estranha vida consegue halo comentário valo nebe capaz los conaba ida ne. Então how incluímos ia capítulo ida ia livro ida ne que how quer buat sirani tu agora livro ida seluk ne ane iha poema ne livro que hawa kerek poema sira ia livro ne how hakerek ia ida, por exemplo, konava prego prego sentimento nem que Timor Oang sira usa ia 99 atu vota ia referendo how hakere kona bedane tamba interessante atu hare katak i horidet prego idane nia decidit ia futuro tomak na saung ida ia ida mak how bolo wailili ia wailili ne hawa kerek tamba ia kolega ida Kieran Dwyer que australiano ida que ia 99 quando ami mai how mai ho nudar parte husi delegação Austrália atu bele hare referendo histórico Timor-nia ia wailili senhor Kieran Dwyer explica ela ia momento na parte da educação cívica quando vou em satu vota e de repente ia katua sida que hamri ki nia karak husu e nia husu nia pergunta nia husu diang nik ni diang senhor se ami ba vota quando to lorong ami ba vota ne sirabe mate teona desde 75 ne siramos bele vota kalai sira se vota kalai e senhor Kieran Dwyer senhor Dwyer ia momento ba hatan dan certamente sira mate ne la bele vota ona mai be ita bot sira nebe Morris ne vota laos dala ida det laos vota ba buat ida det vota dala tolo ba buat tolo ida primeiro ba ita bot ne ang que se Morris ela ida segundo ba sira nebe ita bot dean mate te ona ne nebe ida terceiro ba geração ita bot sira ne que sira Morris ida nema kita bot sira se vota ba
Dek, ita mos bele haktuir kuna wahane sang ohing ita menciona hakerek livro barak ita mais ou menos ida mak motiva ka inspira ita hodi foi tene tempo ba hakerek história ne Timor ne e incluímos a relatório chega ne.
What inspires you to write all these things about Timor and also the Chega report?
Well, I didn't, I worked for CAVR, I helped set it up, and then I worked for post-CAVR, and then thanks to Dr. Rui Arujo, who was Prime Minister in 2016, I was asked to help design what is now Centro Nacional Chega, and these were, unbelievably terrific experiences in my life. Well, yeah, I suppose that's the reason. The whole thing has been a remarkable experience. Very few people from another culture, another country, get to be part of the, in a small way, very small way, to be part of the birth of a new country, to then help set up various institutions that are really important. That particularly help the healing, the recognition, the reparation of victims. The whole experience has made me more anti-war. I don't think I'm passionate enough about it, but I try to be more anti-war. Yeah. As Pope Francis says, the time has come to say unequivocally no to war of any kind, because it does in the 21st century it does so much damage to people, to nature, to infrastructure, buildings, etc. But particularly because many more civilians who are not armed and not trained die in war than soldiers who are armed and trained and can defend themselves. he says 90% of victims of war in the 21st century, only 23 years old, are civilians. So we have to work much harder against war. So my experience of Timor has confirmed that in me. And, then you want to share the story and the stories, and of course I quite enjoy writing. Last Friday I spoke to about 80 English students from Until at Shanana Guzma Reading Room, and about writing. And I tried to say to them, they said to me, but how do you start? I want to write, but I am a blank. How do you start? And I tried to say, well, you don't start writing poetry, you just start writing. It's like going into the kitchen to cook. First time you cook, everybody may go, blah, it's terrible. But then the next time it's a little better, and next time when you keep practicing and practicing. It's the same with writing. What's the point of getting a Facebook post from a friend and then all you do is go, wow, parabens, emojis? No, use the opportunity to actually sit down and write 2 or 3 sentences, even on your phone. Practice writing, and then that can convert into something if you find you have the gift.
Untuk how involve iha estabelecimento CAVR. CAVR ia início itania Timor-Leste ne ukunan e serviço ia incisão irane e quando vai ia tempo vai ir a senhor Rui Araujo sai primeiro-ministro dia mosusuhau atu ami desenha buat irane be o in lorong Itabolo Centro Nacional chega. Ia prosesu sirane razão tamba saha wa kerek ne mak aunoing tamba la iha estrangeiro barak. La iha ema barak husi cultura selo que consegue hare processo moris na saung ida. Mesmo que seja makahalo ne parte kik ida de husi processo ne toma. Mas bena fating saída mak hau harene buat ida ke bote tebes tamba nemak ida nemak razão hau a kerek hau a kerek tamba hau gosta kerek ya semana liuba hau kuliah ho estudante departamento inglês walunulu nesane ya sala leitura sanana e kona ba oinsa hakerek e sira husu hau mai be hau akara hakerek mai be o insatu hau sedamak tengke halo hau ni hatan maka hakerek ne nesang itabot ba cozinha karik atu tein lai mahan primeiro karik dangai hahana la dundiet mai be seita tein na fating e depois ita se sai dia klutan la iha função ita re marumania itania malu rumania posting ni Facebook e quando ita kerek det wow ka parabéns ka hakerek det la hakerek buat ida ka tau det emoji dia kliu ita mostur e karik bele usa itania pedet mesmo que usa itania pedet to hakerek frase ida rua quando vai ser agora amo papa experiência sira Timor experiência sira ne behaure durante un serviço makala lorong balorong sai laos emane be botlos ya botira ne mai be pelo menos hau sai hana sang emaida que quatu sai emane be antifumo amo papa sempre hatete katak ita liu ya século 21 ne tem que halo serviço makasa atu bele para funu atu bele la bele ia funu tamba ia funu sirane hotu vítima militar certamente mas be vítima sira botli liu ia funu sira guerra sira ia século 21 ne maioria ne civil e mesmo que século XXI ne foi em tinang ronul racing tool mas vítima varak de mais ona também mak noi idane buat ida que los e ne ajuda a tu how ne envolvimento e Timor halau percebilitan sai mak papa hatete.
Can I just add that it isn't just me, my whole family have worked here in East Timor in their own right at various times. My beautiful wife Annie, who's watching in the next room, she worked here in education for many years. Our three daughters, the youngest one went to school in Venilali, SMKK, for 12 months, and both my other daughters have worked here in various capacities, so we still remain connected, and there's a generational follow-up to me and my wife, I hope.
Yeah, hau ni familia Tomak, lau saudit, mas be hau ni familia Tomak, halo serviço de Timor, hau ni caben, nebe agora acompanha ela programa ne husi sala seluk nia serviço cleurona e educação e Timor Leste hau ni hanesong ina otetona hau ni ong feto na intolo halo mo serviço e sira ni area rasik hau ni ong feto ide ikung ba SMK Kavin Lale tinang ida e a minha conexão com Timor ne la para ne hanesong buat geracional ida ona.
Ita fiar kata ka ho ohing ita senhor pet fahe experiência além de termos envolvimento hotu nebe maka senhor pet halo durante a ocupação Indonésia toma ia tempo ohing lorong também a menina desejo sucesso baita e agradecemos baita a presença e lorong ohing ho marca presença e programa da DADER KMANEK.
With all your experience you have shared, all the things you have done, we thank you very much for being here. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and it's a great thing having you as our guest in this program this morning.
Yep. Obrigado, Bala. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak.
Ouvintes no telespectadores, e nem magdadalia badak hamudo ko senhor pet, ite pode ser acompanha, husi hahu to mai dadalia rohani dane. Ami fiar kata ko dadalia dane bila lore beta bosira, informação oi hahu envolvimento senhor pet nia pa história Timor. Tamane ouvintes no telespectadores, ko dadalia dane makakoto ona itane sormuto baloron dohin, tamane lore equipa na bima serviço pro programa da DADER KMANEK, how Jacinta Lemos.
No hau Carsolito Oliveira, espera katak, itabel hasor malufali iha lorong abang, ho oras no programa nebe makahanesang, mebe ho assunto nebe makalahanesang.
Tamane lore equipa na bima serviço balorong ohing, lahatu hato agradece e adeus.